It was just another quiet night at the hospital until the automatic doors slid open, and in walked a retired K9 German shepherd, carrying a baby in his jaws. Exhausted, wounded but determined, he placed the infant on the floor and waited. What unfolded next left the entire hospital in tears. It was nearly midnight at Ridgeview General Hospital. Outside, the wind howled with a biting chill, rustling the last brittle leaves of autumn. Inside, the emergency ward was calm, lit by dim fluorescent lights that flickered just slightly, casting long shadows down sterile white corridors. Nurses moved in soft, practiced strides. Machines beeped faintly in the background. The air smelled of antiseptic and coffee that had been brewed hours ago. Then came the sound, the softest of automatic doors opening at the hospital's front entrance. No ambulance, no sirens, no footsteps. Instead, a shadow emerged from the darkness. A large German shepherd, panting heavily, stumbled through the doorway. His coat was filthy, streaked with dried mud and matted patches of fur. His left hind leg had a deep, raw wound. But what caught everyone's attention, what froze the night shift in disbelief, was what he carried gently in his powerful jaws. A baby. Wrapped tightly in a tattered blue blanket, the infant made not a sound. His tiny hand peeked out, curled and unmoving. His skin was ghostly pale. The German shepherd, though clearly injured and exhausted, lowered the bundle carefully onto the cold hospital floor and looked up, straight at the nearest nurse, his eyes glassy but filled with unmistakable urgency. The nurse, a middle-aged woman named Grace, gasped and dropped the clipboard in her hand. "Oh my God," she whispered, rushing forward with cautious steps. "That's a baby. That's a real baby." Others gathered around, unsure whether to trust the dog. But Max, for that was the name etched on the rusted brass tag hanging from his collar, did not move. He simply sat, trembling slightly from pain and cold, his eyes fixed on the small bundle. There was no aggression in him, just a desperate, silent plea. Grace crouched down and carefully peeled back the blanket. The child's lips were blue. "Code red! Infant emergency!" she yelled as loudly as her voice would allow. The ER transformed instantly. Alarms were triggered. 2 doctors sprinted in from the trauma bay. A crash cart was rolled in. Oxygen tanks, IV bags, monitors, all came within seconds. But amid the flurry of activity, Max did not move. He stood his ground, watching each motion, each frantic effort, with eyes that flickered between exhaustion and fierce protectiveness. The baby, no more than a few weeks old, had a dangerously slow heartbeat. Dr. Halston, an older physician with 4 decades of trauma work behind him, looked completely shaken. "Where the hell did this dog come from?" he muttered as he placed a stethoscope on the baby's chest. "He's cold, starving, no signs of bruising, but he wouldn't have survived the night out there." "He still might not," another nurse whispered, tears already forming in her eyes. As they worked to stabilize the child, inserting a tiny IV, warming his body, placing oxygen tubes, someone called animal control. Grace, however, held up her hand. "Not yet. This dog saved that baby's life. We're not doing anything until we know the full story." That's when Officer Liam Brooks arrived. He had been on patrol nearby when dispatch called about a dog with a baby. Even saying it out loud had felt surreal. But the second he stepped through those doors and saw the German shepherd sitting beside the now breathing infant, his training gave way to raw disbelief. "That's a K9 unit," Liam said, pointing to Max. "Look at his posture, the eyes. He's trained." "Trained or not, he walked through that door with a dying baby in his mouth," Grace said, still kneeling beside Max, "and didn't drop a single tear of blood." Max's breathing had slowed now, the adrenaline draining from his body. He let out a soft whine and lowered himself to the ground, still close enough to touch the edge of the child's blanket with his nose. Liam knelt beside him and gently reached toward the tag. "Max," he read aloud. "Unit K9014, County Precinct." "Retired?" Grace asked. "Possibly. Maybe lost during duty. Maybe something worse." Liam scanned for a chip, and sure enough, it pinged. "Got it. I'll call it in." But before he could move away, Max let out another low whine and tried to stand. He stumbled, his wounded leg buckling under him. Grace grabbed a towel and wrapped it gently around the dog's leg. "Easy, boy. You're safe now." The baby let out a soft, shuddering breath. The heart monitor beeped more steadily. Dr. Halston exhaled deeply. He's responding, just barely. But he's got a chance. The entire room fell into a quiet awe. A moment ago, they were coasting through a quiet night shift. Now they were witnessing something they'd never seen before. Something that would change them forever. Max laid his head on the floor, eyes still open but slowly closing. For the first time since he'd entered that hospital, he allowed himself to rest. And as everyone watched this battered, loyal German shepherd curl up beside the baby he had carried through the cold night, no one could say a word. Because somehow this dog, this retired K9, had understood that help was needed. And he had answered the call. Dawn began to break, painting the hospital windows in soft hues of orange and blue, but inside the emergency wing, the weight of the night still lingered. Doctors and nurses moved quietly now, their movements slower, reverent, as if afraid to disturb the fragile balance that had been restored. The baby, now wrapped in clean linens and resting under a radiant warmer, had been transferred to the neonatal intensive care unit. Machines monitored his every heartbeat, every breath, as if the universe had paused to ensure nothing else went wrong. Grace stood beside the glass, arms folded across her chest, watching the infant with a mix of awe and sorrow. "He's a fighter," she whispered. Behind her, Officer Liam Brooks crouched beside Max, who had been gently relocated to a small recovery corner in the ER. A vet tech had arrived to treat his wounded leg, offering stitched care while the shepherd rested. Max didn't resist. He lay there obediently, his breathing shallow, eyes occasionally flicking toward the door of the NICU, as if he could still feel the baby's presence. "He's not letting go of this," Liam said quietly. "It's like he's guarding him, even now." Dr. Halston joined them, rubbing the back of his neck with a weary hand. "That dog bought that kid a chance. The baby's still not out of the woods, but without Max, he wouldn't have made it another hour, not in that cold. Not like that." Grace shook her head. "He didn't just bring the baby here. He chose to come inside, to walk through the doors. He knew. God help me, he knew." Liam stared down at Max, who responded with a faint wag of his tail. "That kind of loyalty doesn't come from training. That comes from something deeper." The chip scan had identified Max as a former K9 from the county's retired unit. Records showed he had served with distinction before being officially discharged after his handler's death 2 years ago. Since then, no one knew where he had gone. "He disappeared from the system," Liam said, reviewing the data. "No adoption record. No foster report. Just gone." So where had he been? And more importantly, where had the baby come from? The silence was broken by the arrival of Detective Karen Monroe, a seasoned investigator with sharp eyes and a colder heart. She had been called in when the case turned strange. A baby with no identity, a dog with a mysterious past, and no clear origin for either. "This is the stuff of novels," she muttered, flipping through her notes as she walked through the ER. "But there's a real child involved, and I need answers." Liam briefed her, showing the collar, the tag, the vet report on Max, and the chip data. Karen gave Max a sideways glance, her expression unreadable. "And no leads on the baby?" "None yet," Grace replied. "No missing child reports. No one's come forward." Karen exhaled slowly. "Then we follow the only clue we've got." She knelt beside Max and met his tired eyes. "Hey, hero," she said, not unkindly. "Can you show us where you came from?" Max didn't respond at first, but when Liam stood and gently clipped the leash back onto his collar, the dog stirred. He sniffed the air, ears twitching. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet. He took a step forward, and then another. Within seconds, Max was limping toward the doors. The patrol car rolled slowly through the city's early morning streets, the sky above still streaked with gray. Max sat in the back seat beside Liam, who kept a careful hand on the leash. "He's alert," Liam said. "Knows where he's going." Karen drove silently, following Max's occasional barks or low whines as they turned down old roads and run-down neighborhoods. They passed boarded-up shops, rusted fences, and hollow-eyed people wandering from shelter to shelter. The further they went, the more desolate it became. Then Max growled low. Karen hit the brakes. The dog was pawing at the window now, his energy surging despite the limp. They had reached a row of abandoned houses, most of them with collapsed porches and shattered windows. But one, half covered in vines, had its front door swinging slightly open in the wind. "This is it," Liam said. They stepped out into the bitter morning air. Max led them directly to the door, then paused, ears perked, tail straight. Karen drew her weapon but kept it low, signaling Liam to stay behind her. With slow, cautious steps, they entered. The air inside was rank. Mildew clung to the walls. Empty bottles, torn blankets, and broken toys lay scattered across the floor. In the far corner of the living room, there was an overturned crib. The imprint of where a small child had slept was still visible in the dust. "He brought the baby from here?" Karen asked in disbelief. Max sniffed around the room, walking in small, tight circles. Then he led them through a narrow hallway to a bedroom with peeling wallpaper. On the bed was a threadbare coat, a woman's. Beside it, a half-empty baby formula bottle, long spoiled, and a small torn photograph. A young woman cradling a newborn, her face pale but smiling. Next to her, in the background, was Max. Liam picked it up gently. "This was his family," he whispered. Karen took a step back, her expression darkening. "We need forensics here. Someone abandoned that child. That's criminal neglect." "Or desperation," Liam murmured. They found no one else in the house, just the remnants of survival. A small heater, cracked bowls, scribbled notes in the corner of the wall. "Please be safe," one note read. "Please forgive me." Liam knelt beside Max. "You were all they had, weren't you?" he said, gently scratching behind the dog's ear. Max responded with a low whimper. Back at the hospital, Grace checked on the baby every hour. She had named him Lucas for now, the name meaning light, and he was, to her, a light in the darkest of places. But as the day wore on, one truth became hauntingly clear. Someone had left Lucas behind, and Max, battered, bleeding, and faithful, had crossed an entire city to save him. The abandoned house offered no more clues that morning. Officers had swept through the property, dusting for prints, collecting what little evidence remained. The crib, the photograph, the scattered notes. But there was no sign of the mother. No trail. No name. Only Max's silent presence and the fading memory of a life that had vanished without a trace. But Max knew more than anyone could guess. And that afternoon, something shifted. Back at the hospital, Grace sat beside the incubator where little Lucas, still unidentified, lay connected to machines and wires. His breathing was stronger now, his skin no longer so pale. The feeding tube helped deliver nutrients slowly into his fragile body. Grace stroked his tiny fingers, tears in her eyes. "You've got someone watching over you, sweetheart," she whispered. "A guardian in fur." Meanwhile, in the hospital lobby, Liam and Karen regrouped. Detective Monroe had requested local shelters and social services to scan through missing persons and maternal cases, women with infants, struggling with homelessness or domestic abuse. But so far, there were no matches. "This woman is invisible," Karen said. "No ID, no recent hospital visit, no known address." But Max grew restless again. He paced, whined, his ears perked at every passing voice. He moved to the door several times, pulling at the leash gently, as though urging someone to follow him again. But he was exhausted. The wound in his leg had begun to swell again. Liam guided him back to the recovery mat, trying to calm him. "Where is she, boy?" he asked softly. "Who is she?" 2 hours later, a call came through from a park 6 blocks from the hospital. "A woman was spotted sitting alone," the dispatcher said. "Looks cold, thin, confused, may need medical assistance." Liam and Karen were out the door before the message finished. The park was quiet, shaded by brittle trees that swayed in the chilly wind. On one bench sat a woman, hunched forward, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her face was gaunt, her lips cracked. She wore an oversized hoodie and thin pants not made for the cold. Her eyes stared into nothing. Karen approached first, slowly. "Ma'am," she said softly. "Are you all right?" No answer. Liam crouched slightly in front of her. "We're here to help. We just need to ask, do you know anything about a child brought to the hospital this morning? A baby?" The woman's eyes widened. Slowly, trembling, she turned to them. "My baby?" she whispered, voice almost inaudible. Karen's eyes narrowed. "What's his name?" The woman pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. "Noah. My son. Is he alive?" Tears flooded her eyes. Her voice cracked. I left him. I didn't want to, I swear, but I had no choice." Liam stepped closer, his tone gentle but firm. "You need to come with us. He's safe now, and he's alive." At those words, the woman collapsed into sobs, covering her face. Her entire body trembled as if it were just now beginning to feel the cold and the pain of days without rest. They helped her onto a stretcher and rushed her to the hospital. Her name, they soon learned, was Rachel Bennett. 27. No criminal history, no drugs, just poverty, isolation, and a life that had fallen apart after her partner, Noah's father, had abandoned them when the child was only a few weeks old. Since then, she had tried everything. Shelters, food banks, desperate job interviews with Noah clinging to her hip. But it wasn't enough. "We were in that house because it was the only place we had," she said quietly, as doctors checked her vitals. "It didn't have heat. I hadn't eaten in 3 days, but Max stayed. Even when I couldn't go on, I told him—" She broke off, her voice catching. "I told him to save Noah. I looked into his eyes, and I begged him. I begged him to take my baby somewhere safe." Grace stood nearby, listening in stunned silence. She turned away, wiping a tear from her cheek. The idea was absurd. A mother entrusting her baby to a dog. And yet, that dog had saved a life. Later, Rachel was wheeled down the NICU hallway. Max, now bandaged and groggy from pain meds, had sensed her return. He stood slowly when she entered, his body still stiff, but his tail gave a slow wag. She paused at the door to the NICU, barely breathing. Then she stepped inside. Her eyes locked on the baby in the incubator. She gasped and stumbled forward, Noah. Her hands trembled as she gently touched the clear plastic that separated her from him. Monitors beeped, tubes hissed. But there he was, alive, breathing, moving. Rachel sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Behind her, Max laid down quietly, resting his head on his paws, but his eyes never left them, not for a second. Dr. Halston entered the room quietly. He placed a hand on her shoulder. He's going to be okay, thanks to Max and to you. Rachel looked up at the doctor, broken but grateful. I thought I'd lost him forever. You didn't, he said gently. You had someone who never gave up on him. She looked back at Max. I don't know how he did it, she whispered. But I always knew. He would try. That evening, Rachel was allowed to sit with Noah for the first time. She held his tiny hand, whispering softly through her tears. Her voice cracked, her words halting, but her soul poured out everything she had kept buried. I'm sorry, my baby, I tried. I really tried. And beside her, Max kept watch, the silent protector who had defied all odds, and fulfilled the final promise his human had made. That night, the hospital was no longer a place of silence and routine. It had become sacred ground. In the NICU room, dimly lit and hushed by the lull of gentle machines, Rachel sat beside her son, Noah, her frail body curled protectively around the incubator. Her eyes never left him. Neither did Max's. The medical staff, though trained to maintain professional distance, had grown emotionally attached to the small family who had arrived not in an ambulance, but through an act of unspoken heroism. Nurses would check on Noah just a bit more often. Grace stayed long past her shift. Even Dr. Halston, grizzled and often gruff, softened visibly each time he entered the room. Rachel spoke in quiet whispers to Noah through the glass. You're strong like your father, she murmured, but brave like Max. She turned her eyes to the old dog lying by the door, ears twitching with each monitor beep. He had refused to leave the room. The vet had warned that Max needed rest, that the stress was too much for a dog his age, especially one still recovering from infection and a wounded leg. But Max had made up his mind. He would not leave Noah again. The next morning brought with it unexpected visitors. A tall woman in a pressed blazer and thin spectacles stood in the hallway, holding a manila folder. Behind her stood a soft-faced social worker, clipboard in hand. Liam met them both outside the NICU doors. We need to discuss the welfare of the child, the woman said. There was abandonment involved, and given the medical condition. Liam raised a hand. Before you assume anything, you need to hear what happened, all of it. They listened, skeptically at first. But as the pieces of the story came together, the empty house, the tattered note, the malnourishment, and Max's miraculous journey, even the clipboard began to shake slightly in the social worker's hands. You're telling me a dog brought this baby across town? To a hospital? She asked, barely able to finish the sentence. No, Liam corrected. A hero did. Inside, Rachel had been told the state might intervene. Her breath caught. Her hands gripped the blanket tightly. I never wanted to abandon him, she pleaded softly. I couldn't feed him. I was starving myself. I had no one left, not even a place to sleep. But Max, he'd been my only friend for years. I knew he'd do something. He had to. He always protected us. Tears welled in her eyes. I trusted him more than anyone, even more than myself. Grace, standing behind the glass, put a hand on Rachel's shoulder. You didn't give up, Rachel. You made the hardest, bravest decision a mother could make, and you gave your son a fighting chance. The state agent listened quietly. After some time, she stepped into the NICU room and looked down at Noah, still fragile, but now breathing evenly, his tiny limbs moving in sleep. "I'll write a recommendation," she said. "She'll need supervised support, of course. But if what I've heard is true, this child was never unloved." Rachel buried her face in her hands and wept, not because she was being judged, but because, for the first time in weeks, she felt seen, heard, believed. By the following day, the story had begun to spread. First, it was whispered among the nurses. Then a doctor mentioned it to a colleague. And soon, a reporter from the local paper arrived at the hospital lobby. "I'm here about the dog that saved a baby," she said, notebook in hand. Liam stood beside Max, who now had a soft fleece blanket wrapped around him, donated by one of the nurses. "He didn't just save a baby," Liam said. "He saved a family." The article published the next morning under the headline, "Canine Guardian. German Shepherd carries infant to hospital. Defies all odds." Within hours, the hospital's phones began to ring. Offers of help poured in. Donations, food, shelter assistance, messages from other police departments, former K9 handlers, and strangers across the country. But Max didn't understand any of that. He only knew that Rachel smiled now, and Noah, though still weak, had begun to coo softly when she spoke. That was enough. That night, Max's condition worsened briefly. The vet on call found signs of infection spreading in his hind leg, old wounds that had reopened during his journey. Pain medication was administered, but the prognosis was grim. "He pushed himself past his limit," the vet explained. "Dogs his age, they don't usually survive trauma like this." Rachel sat beside him in the dimly lit vet bay, set up for him in the hospital's quiet wing. She gently placed her hand on his fur. "Don't you go," she whispered. Max lifted his head slowly. His eyes met hers. Calm, steady. She leaned down, resting her forehead against his. "You've done enough. You saved him. You saved me." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "You can rest now." But Max wasn't done. By morning he had stabilized, not improved, not healed, but breathing evenly, his body fighting. It was as if something in him refused to let go. Not yet. When Grace returned and found him still breathing, still watching the NICU doors, she broke into a quiet, tearful smile. "He's waiting to see that baby go home," she whispered. "He's not leaving until he knows." And so Max stayed. Healed slowly, watched daily, and waited for the moment when the boy he had carried in his mouth, cold, breathless, and barely alive, would leave the hospital in his mother's arms. He had brought Noah here not just for treatment, but for hope, for a second chance. And he would not rest until he saw it complete. It was a sunny morning when Dr. Halston made the announcement everyone had waited days to hear. "Noah is ready to be discharged." The room seemed to exhale all at once. Grace clasped her hands to her mouth, tears instantly springing to her eyes. Liam smiled, exhaling a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But no one reacted more deeply than Rachel, who sat beside her son's crib, her fingers gently tracing the outline of his tiny face. "My baby's coming home," she whispered, voice trembling. "We made it." Noah cooed softly, as if in reply. His eyes, brighter and steadier now, locked onto his mother's. He reached up with both hands, grasping nothing, but reaching toward everything. 2 floors below, Max stirred. His condition had stabilized, though the infection had taken its toll. His legs were weak, and he limped badly. But his ears perked the moment he heard the gentle thump of Rachel's footsteps and the faint rhythm of Noah's babbling echoing down the hallway. Grace brought Max a clean leash and a special soft harness. "You ready to see him again?" she asked with a smile. Max tried to stand and wobbled, but then he caught the scent in the air. Faint, familiar, Safe. Noah. He steadied himself, pulled his body upward, and took a careful step forward. Then another. Rachel walked slowly into the room where Max waited. In her arms, bundled tightly in a donated blanket, was Noah, wide-eyed and full of life. Max froze for a beat. Then, with great effort, he limped to them and rested his head gently against Rachel's knee. "No more pain, Max," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "You did it. You brought him home." She gently lowered Noah down to Max's eye level. The baby blinked, then reached out, small fingers brushing the top of Max's head. Max closed his eyes and let out the softest sound. Not a growl, not a whine, but something deeper. A sigh of peace. That afternoon, the hospital staff gathered outside as Rachel, holding Noah close, stepped through the front doors. The same doors Max had entered through only days before, carrying a life in his jaws. Now they were walking out as a family. Max moved beside her, slower now, limping heavily, but he held his head high, proud, dignified, resolute. The same community that had watched the story unfold through newspapers and local TV now stood outside the hospital with signs and tears and open arms. A few brought toys for Noah. Others carried dog treats for Max. One elderly woman placed a small bouquet in Rachel's hands. "For strength," she said. "Yours and his." Rachel looked out over the crowd, overwhelmed. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. "Thank you for giving us a second chance." At her side, Max gave a small bark, not loud, but full of life. The crowd smiled, applauded. Later that day, Rachel unlocked the door to their new apartment, a simple, clean space provided by a local support group. The lights worked, the heater hummed. A crib had already been donated and set up near the window. Noah giggled as Rachel set him down gently in the crib, his legs kicking with joy. Max stepped over, collapsed gently on the rug beside the crib, and placed his head near the frame. Rachel watched him, eyes filled with warmth. "You're staying with us, Max? Forever." Outside, the sky turned gold with the setting sun. Inside, a family that had once been broken now rested, together. Rachel curled up on the couch and watched as Noah fell asleep. Then she looked at Max, his breathing slow and even, his chest rising with contentment. "You're not just a dog," she whispered. "You're a miracle." And in that small, quiet apartment, filled with the echoes of struggle, sacrifice, and survival, peace finally returned. Max's journey had begun with loss, but it ended with something eternal. A family reunited, a life saved, a promise fulfilled.